All right, folks. I'm about to show you how to read and analyze nonfiction. Unlike a lot of the things we do in this class, this is a skill that you can directly use in your adult life once you get out of school. So for one, you need to be able to read nonfiction well because that's the majority of what you will spend the rest of your life reading, whether it's job training, communicating for work, or just reading social media. Most of the situations you will encounter in your adult life are reading nonfiction, not fiction or poetry. The ability to comprehend what you read fully and the ability to know when you are being manipulated by what you're reading, those are both really important for situations like advertising or even reading the contract that you're about to sign, particularly if you're working in a business type of situation. This is also directly applicable to your life when you think about situations where you will need to write. So the first example that comes to mind is writing a cover letter to apply to a job. You might not know what a cover letter is yet at this point, but if you begin to apply for any professional opportunities, it's not enough to fill out an application or to simply turn in a resume. In a lot of cases, you also have to turn in what is called a cover letter, and in that case, you will have to keep in mind the central idea of what it is that you're trying to convey, the audience you are writing for, your purpose, and the tone in which you write your letter. Even if you think you will not end up in a business or marketing or journalism type of field, you cannot predict the future. I am the only person out of both my high school and college friend groups who is doing what they thought they would be doing when they graduated from high school. Mostly everyone else is working in a different field than they had envisioned for themselves. And I'm not saying that that's a reason not to go after your dreams or that you can't accomplish your dreams. You absolutely can, but I am saying that you cannot predict the future and you don't want to shut yourself off of future opportunities because you thought that it was not important to learn how to write properly when you were in school. All right, so you already know what central idea is. Central idea is the main, most important idea that an author is trying to convey in a work of nonfiction. And you already know what tone is. Tone is the author's attitude towards their subject, what they're writing about. But let's talk about audience and purpose, both of which are related to the central idea and the tone. So your audience, or your intended audience, is the person or group of people that you are writing for. When you think about audience, you can think about it in terms of age. Are you writing for small children? Are you writing for adults? Are you writing for teenagers? Are you writing for older people? You can think about it in terms of class. Is it aimed towards people who are very wealthy? Is it aimed towards middle class people? Is it aimed towards low income people? Sometimes you think about it in gender, aimed towards men or women. Sometimes you think about it in terms of specific occupations. Is this a doctor who is writing for other doctors? Is this a librarian who is writing for the general public? Is this... So I have an authentic, a real example of audience here that I'm about to show you. So the purpose in both of these situations is to sell a product, to get people to come into a store and buy things. But these are very different stores that have different target markets, different groups of people that they're trying to sell for. So these two advertisements are written with very different audiences in mind. So first, let's take a look at an advertisement from Trader Joe's. All right. So Trader Joe's target market is middle to upper income people, generally people who are college educated. These are people who are very health conscious, they like to read, and they can afford to pay a little bit more for groceries. If you will notice from looking at this website, they are advertising these organic blue corn tortilla chips. They do have a picture of the product, and then underneath they have several paragraphs about what these chips are made of and why people should buy them. A lot of print here, and if I click on this plus button, I can see a full list of the ingredients and nutrition facts. I notice that they are using very high-level vocabulary. For example, Right here they use the word punctilious. They are assuming that the people who buy from them are highly educated, they are able to understand the language they are using, and that they actually care about these things. So Trader Joe's intended audience here are college-educated, middle-class to wealthy people who they are trying to attract into their stores. Let's compare this to an ad from Save-A-Lot. All right, so Save-A-Lot is a grocery store that is usually found in lower income communities. Lower income communities tend to have less education, fewer people who have graduated from college, and in some cases even high school. These people, it's not that these people don't care about eating healthfully, they do. As you can see advertised here on the side, fresh fruits and vegetables, but they might not be able to afford the same level of healthy foods as people who have more money, or they might not be as educated in nutrition. That's not to say they can't be, but we're speaking generally here. You can tell a lot of differences in this ad versus the ad for the blue corn tortilla chips on Trader Joe's. This is much more focused on pictures. I don't see a whole lot of text here, and the prices are very, very large. Compare that to the Trader Joe's ad. You have to really look to find the price. It's right here. The people who are buying from Trader Joe's are not as concerned about prices as the people who are buying from Save-A-Lot, because Save-A-Lot is aimed toward a low-income audience that is generally less educated than Trader Joe's. So this is one situation in which you can see audience directly influencing the way a work of text or an advertisement is put together. Now let's talk about purpose. Author's purpose can be described in general terms. So usually the purpose is either to inform, persuade, or entertain. It's important to be able to tell what the purpose of a work of writing is so that you are not manipulated, so that you know that you are getting the most accurate information about something possible. Here is a real-life situation of that I can show you. So this website is a website about the drug Humira, and its purpose is to sell Humira, to make people ask their doctors about Humira so that they get it prescribed for them. So overall the purpose here is to persuade, but if you just look at most of this particular page, it talks about rheumatoid arthritis, and it provides a lot of information on what rheumatoid arthritis is, what the symptoms are, causes, and there's even a video about how it can cause irreversible joint damage, to make people who have rheumatoid arthritis or who think they might have rheumatoid arthritis be very concerned. Then here at the bottom, you'll notice they slip in information about Humira. Right after they scare you about all the things rheumatoid arthritis can do to you, they say, oh, but if you try our drug, that can help reduce pain and stiffness and stop further joint damage. So this is a biased source. It's trying to persuade you to buy Humira. It's not just trying to inform you about rheumatoid arthritis. Let's compare this to a website that is actually meant to inform you about rheumatoid arthritis. So this webpage is from the American College of Rheumatology. All right, so it gives us a lot of the same information. It lists the causes, what it is, symptoms, and then if you look at treatment, it doesn't just focus on one particular drug. It mentions several different drugs you can take. So the purpose here is genuinely to help people become informed about rheumatoid arthritis, not to persuade them to buy a particular drug. Let's take a look at an article that was originally taken from a newspaper, but obviously now it has been adapted for students, because we can tell that because of the name and class lines up here and the assignment written here. So let's pretend that's not there for our purposes and see how we could figure out what the intended audience of this was, even if we didn't know that. So just going to cross this right out. Okay, so I'm going to go through the full process of reading nonfiction and then show you how I would analyze this to find the audience purpose and tone. So before you read nonfiction, it's usually a good idea to take a look at the title, any pictures you see, and any subheadings you see, so that you can begin to preview what the article is going to be about. The title here is What the Flu Does to Your Body and Why It Makes You Feel So Awful. My first thoughts are that this is very informal language. So this is probably not a doctor writing for other doctors, because they would probably use more formal and more technical language than something like, say, so awful here. So that's some interesting note on the diction. I also noticed that there's a picture here. Okay. You see the picture is of a small child who is laying in bed, and the caption here says influenza flu. So this is supposed to be a picture of someone who is currently suffering from the flu. Alright, looking at the subheadings, we see how the flu works its way into your body, why your head hurts so much, as well as why your muscles ache. So it looks to me like this article is about explaining the effects that the flu has on your body. As I read this, I'm going to do something that's called road mapping, which essentially is down a short summary of each paragraph as I read it. This will help me take a look at how the paragraphs are organized, but more importantly, it will make sure I am monitoring my comprehension as I read. Now what that means is stopping to make sure I understood what I just read. Good readers will do this automatically, but if you're not this reader, which a lot of you are not, and that's okay, making yourself do this will help you get into that habit. Paragraph 1. Every year, from 5 to 20% of the people in the United States will become infected with influenza virus. An average of 200,000 of those people will require hospitalization, and up to 50,000 will die. Older folks over the age of 65 are especially susceptible. Footnote here, let's see what susceptible means. Susceptible, likely to be influenced or harmed by something. Okay, so I'm going to go back and place that in where it says susceptible in the article. Older folks over the age of 65 are especially likely to be influenced or harmed by the influenza infection, since the immune system becomes weaker with age. In addition, older folks are also more susceptible to long-term disability following influenza infection, especially if they are hospitalized. Alright, so the main things I take out of that are that a lot of people become infected with the flu each year. Old people are most likely to be seriously impacted by the flu. Okay, you will note that I use some abbreviations here. That's because road mapping isn't a very serious writing format. As long as I understand what I'm writing, that's all that matters. So it's okay to use abbreviations. In fact, I would encourage it. Alright, let's look at our second paragraph here. We all know the symptoms of influenza infection include fever, cough, sore throat, muscle aches, headaches, and fatigue. But just what causes all of the havoc? What is going on in your body as you fight the flu? So I think this paragraph is meant to be a transition between describing what the flu is in general and transitioning to the main topic of the article, which is what the flu does to your body. So I'm going to write out in my roadmap this. In the third paragraph, the author talks to us directly. She says, I'm a researcher who specializes in immunology. Let's see, immunology is a branch of medicine and biology that deals with the immune system. Okay, so the author is a researcher who specializes in immunology at the University of Connecticut's medicine, and my laboratory focuses on how infection affects the body and how our bodies combat the virus. It's interesting to note that many of the body's defenses that attack the virus also cause many of the symptoms associated with the flu. Okay, so the author introduces herself and also introduces the idea that the immune system causes a lot of the symptoms. So I'm going to write, okay, subtitle, How the Flu Works Its Way into Your Body. Influenza virus causes an infection in the respiratory tract, nose, throat, and lungs. The virus is inhaled or transmitted, usually via your fingers, to the mucous membranes of the mouth, nose, or eyes. It then travels down the respiratory tract and binds to epithelial cells lining the lung airways via specific molecules on the cell surface. We have a footnote here on epithelial cells. Let's see what those are. Okay, epithelial cells are cells on the surfaces of your body, serving as a barrier between the inside and outside of your body. Okay, so they're basically surface cells. Once inside the cells, the virus hijacks the protein manufacturing machinery of the cell to generate its own viral proteins and create more viral particles. Once mature viral particles are produced, they are released from the cell and can then go on to invade adjacent cells. What I got out of this paragraph was how the virus, well, basically what the subtitle says, how the flu works its way into your body. So I'm just going to use that as my road mapping here. While the process causes lung injury, most of the symptoms of the flu are actually caused by the immune response to the virus. The initial immune response involves cells of the body's innate immune system, such as macrophages and neutrophils. These cells express receptors that are meant to sense the presence of the virus. They then sound the alarm by producing small hormone-like molecules called cytokines and chemokines. These alert the body that an infection has been established. This paragraph is mainly about how the body responds to the virus, and it echoes the idea that the author mentioned earlier. So instead of writing a note out to the side here, I'm actually going to underline a sentence that I think expresses the main point of this particular paragraph. Cytokines orchestrate other components of the immune system to appropriately fight the invading virus, while chemokines direct these components to the location of infection. One of the types of cells called into action are T lymphocytes, a type of white blood cell that fights infection. Sometimes they are called soldier cells. When T cells specifically recognize influenza protein, they begin to increase rapidly in numbers in the lymph nodes around the lungs and throat. This causes swelling and pain in these lymph nodes. So the paragraph is mainly what cytokines and chemokines do. So I'm going to that to the side. Next paragraph. After a few days, these T cells move to the lungs and begin to kill the virus-infected cells. This process creates a great deal of lung damage similar to bronchitis, which can worsen existing lung disease and make breathing difficult. In addition, the buildup of mucus in the lungs as a result of this immune response to infection induces coughing as a reflex to try to clear the airways. Normally, this damage triggered by arrival of T cells in the lungs is reversible in a healthy person, but when it advances, it is bad news and leads to death. So this paragraph is about the effect of T cells on the lungs. I'm going to write that as my roadmap note. The proper functioning of influenza-specific T cells is critical for efficient clearance of the virus from the lungs. When T cell function declines, such as with increasing age or during use of immunosuppressive drugs, which are drugs that suppress an individual's immune response, viral clearance is delayed. This results in prolonged infection and greater lung damage. This also can set the stage for complications including secondary bacterial pneumonia, which can often be deadly. As I'm reading this, I'm thinking about how early in the article it mentioned that older people are far more likely to die from the disease. So when I read about how the virus can be deadly and how T cell function declines with increasing age, that reminded me of that. So I'm going to write my road mapping note about the importance of T cell function. All right. So our next subtitle says, Why Your Head Hurts So Much. While the influenza virus is wholly contained in the lungs under normal circumstances, several symptoms of influenza are systemic. Systemic meaning relating to a system, especially as opposed to a particular part of that system. So in this case, systemic would mean it affects your whole body, not just your lungs. All right, so several symptoms of influenza are systemic, including fever, headache, fatigue, and muscle aches. In order to properly combat influenza infection, cytokines and chemokines produced by the innate immune cells in the lungs become systemic. That is, they enter the bloodstream and contribute to these systemic symptoms. When this happens, a cascade of complicating biological events occur. All right, so I think one sentence in this paragraph more or less sums up what happens. The cytokines and chemokines produced by the innate immune cells in the lungs become systemic. Okay, moving on. Paragraph 10. One of the things that happens is that interleukin-1, an inflammatory type of cytokine, is activated. Interleukin-1 is important for developing the killer T cell response against the virus, but it also affects the part of the brain and thalamus that regulates body temperature, resulting in fever and headache. Meaning interleukin-1 causes fever and headaches. Another important cytokine that fights influenza infection is something called tumor necrosis factor alpha. This cytokine can have direct antiviral effects on the lungs, and that's good. But it can also cause fever and appetite loss, fatigue and weakness during influenza and other types of infection. Okay, this paragraph was so short, I'm just going to underline some things. Let's see, tumor necrosis factor alpha. And then I'm going to draw an arrow. Because it helps when it has antiviral effects in the lungs, but it hurts when it causes fever, appetite loss, fatigue, and weakness. One more bit to go. Thus, while you feel miserable when you have an influenza infection, you can rest assured that it is because your body is fighting hard. It's combating the spread of the virus in your lungs and killing infected cells. Circling this whole thing because I feel like this is what the whole article was about. It was about the body's response to the flu and how most of your symptoms are caused by the body fighting off the flu, not the flu itself. So, if I look back at this title, we have an important clue as to what the central idea is. The first part of the central idea is what the flu does to your body. The flu causes a lot of unpleasant symptoms, which are more severe in older people. And why it makes you feel so awful? Your immune system responds to the flu, which causes these symptoms. So if I put those two together, I have the central idea of the article. Now let's talk about audience, purpose, and tone. All three of those are related and they all support the central idea. Okay, let's start with purpose. This did not try to make me take action, did not try to take my opinion on something. It did not try to make me buy something or feel a certain way. So this was definitely not meant to persuade me. This was not very fun or amusing to read. It didn't provoke a whole lot of thought, so I do not think the purpose was entertainment. I believe that the purpose of this was to inform, to explain how the flu works, basically. So the purpose in this case is to be informative. All right. So if the purpose was to inform, then who is the audience? Who was the author, Laura Haynes, trying to inform? Was this meant for other doctors? I don't think so, because a doctor would be very familiar with the effects of the flu and how the immune system works. I believe that this was a doctor writing for the general public, and at that, I think the age group would be teenage to adult. I say that because the language here, using things like footnotes, susceptible, the influenza, the word realization, these longer words, a little kid is not going to understand, but a teenager or someone older than that would understand how to use footnotes, and they would have a much larger vocabulary. So the audience is the general public, let's say ages 15 and up. I don't think this was aimed towards a particular class or a particular gender. Now let's talk about tone. So the tone is relatively formal. It's not casual, but it's also not academic necessarily. If this were academic, okay, if the author was writing for other doctors, the tone might be more scientific, more formal, more academic. But since they're writing for the general public, she uses words like so awful, and she bothers to provide footnotes on words like susceptible or immunology. I would call the tone objective because she's not expressing any kind of opinion, she's just giving us facts here. I would call it relatively formal because it's not very casual. And I would call it knowledgeable because she is able to understand, she's able to explain these complicated topics in a way that most people can understand them, even if they are not doctors.